We're going to start with some big news from Sky Germany this lunchtime, who are reporting that Bayern Munich are now close to withdrawing from negotiations with Newcastle. That is after new internal discussions this morning. Bayern Munich currently do not plan to submit a new offer and do not want to overpay for Kieran Trippier. James, just remind us, first of all, how do we get to this stage?
Yeah, just to recap, I guess the breaking news over the last 24 hours or so, Newcastle rejecting a second offer from Bayern Munich for Kieran Trippier. They've got an issue at right back which they need to solve in this window. Now, we're told that bid was somewhere in the region around £13 million, but Newcastle's stance has not changed throughout this entire window. Kieran Trippier is not for sale, and that stance has not changed and will not change. Now, we understand Kieran Trippier is open to the move, but he's not agitating for it necessarily. So we wait to see if Bayern Munich plan to submit a new offer. He's seen as a short-term option rather than a long-term one. So I think if Kieran Trippier is to move to Bayern Munich, it will happen in this window. It won't happen at all. 33 years of age, 18 months left on his contract. So that's why it may look quite attractive for Newcastle to sell. We know how tight they are when it comes to PSR constraints. However, getting £13 million for Newcastle doesn't do a huge amount for them in terms of what they could do in terms of bringing in a replacement. We know Kieran Trippier has had a difficult last few weeks. He's made a number of high-profile errors, but he's still created more chances than anybody in that Newcastle team this season. 7 assists in the Premier League. Yes, they have a long-term successor in Tino Livramento, but I don't think he's quite ready to step up to the plate for Newcastle because you consider his injury problems. Only started 8 Premier League matches in the last 2 years, missed a year of football with a knee injury. He's the long-term successor, but I don't think he's quite ready just yet. Newcastle probably don't see him right just yet. So the deal doesn't make sense for Newcastle at this point in time. If Bayern Munich look to go again, something closer to £20 million may make sense because of what I mentioned, the age, how long's left on his contract. So it's not a deal that makes a huge amount of sense at the moment for Newcastle. They don't want to sell him. It does feel like in the summer there could be a big overhaul of this Newcastle squad. But at this moment in time, he's staying at Newcastle. And also, I don't think, from what we're learning from Sky Germany, I don't think everybody at Bayern Munich was entirely sold on the prospects of signing Kieran Trippier because of his age. Lothar Matthäus, a Bayern Munich legend, feels like they should be looking at younger options in that area. So as things stand, he remains a Newcastle player. Newcastle's stance remains the same. Bayern's stance, it looks like they're going off the prospect of going for a third bid, but 8 days left in the window, anything could happen.
Yeah, well, you say anything can happen. At the moment, it looks like he's going to stay a Newcastle player. Do you agree with James in terms of what he's saying about Newcastle and them obviously just wanting to keep hold of him?
I mean, James has covered absolutely everything there, the whole history of Newcastle and Bayern Munich. But I think it's job done for Newcastle if Bayern Munich pull out and decide not to go back in. I think that's probably what Newcastle are doing. They're showing to the player that, look, if a reasonable offer comes in and you're keen to go, we let you go. Trippier's not agitating for a move, we understand, but he's open to it, is the word that we've been getting. So Newcastle, by pricing him around the 20 million price point, knowing that Bayern probably won't go there, I think that does smack of job done from Newcastle's point of view. The interesting thing is from the Bayern end for me, and you're talking about the hierarchy not being sure about getting in a player of that age for that fee, James. Tuchel carries a lot more weight than maybe the last few Bayern Munich managers have, and I think if he agitated and pushed and said, I really want this player, perhaps Bayern Munich would listen to him and go there, because I know since Tuchel's been there, even Eric Dyer, he probably wouldn't have been signed if it wasn't for Thomas Tuchel and his instruction. So it might go to next week if Tuchel decided to come back in and said he was adamant he needed this player, because Bayern have left themselves a lot to do at right back as well. They lost a couple of right backs in the summer in Pavard and Stanisic. They both ended up leaving. So Bayern left themselves vulnerable. We know they wanted Kyle Walker, another English right back in their 30s. In the summer as well. So this seems to be the type of profile of player that Thomas Tuchel trusts, that he wants to be part of his team. They'll obviously be gunning for the Bundesliga, gunning for the Champions League as well, and he'll want to strengthen in that position. So although at the moment it's looking like Bayern won't get that deal done, I still think in the next week perhaps something will change if Tuchel's adamant he needs him.
Yeah, Dan makes a good point talking about Thomas Tuchel there and the pull that he could maybe have as manager. Obviously, we heard from Florian Plettenberg on Good Morning Transfers this morning. Hopefully going to hear from him a little bit later on Transfer Talk as well. But he made it clear that Bayern were willing to pay 15 to 16 million euros. But the key line as well is that he said, look, Bayern don't want to do something that's unreasonable. And that is ultimately what it comes down to. And
that probably would be unreasonable, wouldn't it, if going towards £20 million for somebody who's 33, as we mentioned, isn't a long-term target, 18 months left of his contract at Newcastle. And yes, even if Newcastle sold him for £20 million, it wouldn't make a huge amount of difference when it comes to PSR in terms of what they could do, in terms of the headroom it would create. But I think, forget PSR from a business perspective, to get £20 million for a 33-year-old who they signed for £12 million, who perhaps maybe is reached the peak of his powers and is on the way down now, that makes sense. But I don't think when Newcastle signed Kieran Trippier for £12 million, I don't think the Saudi owners thought, right, we're going to be able to sell him for £30 million in a few years' time. I think they saw him as a long-term plan. And he's been so brilliant for Newcastle. He's such an important part of their style of play as well. As I mentioned, he's created more chances than anybody else in that team. He's a talisman. He's their vice-captain. I think to sell him in this window wouldn't make a huge amount of sense and would suggest that maybe Newcastle have almost potentially given up this season. It's a case of rebuilding in the summer. They're 14 points off Champions League qualification. I can't see them getting anywhere close to getting back into contention unless they keep Kieran Trippier. He's so important for them.
Yeah, he is. I mean, James talks about him being a talisman. It was the leadership that he brought. You know, he was the start of sort of when they had that takeover and the new signings that came in. He was sort of the start of it all.
Well, he elevated standards, didn't he, immediately. As soon as he came through the door, other players followed and Newcastle started getting results. He's very much an Eddie Howe lieutenant, I would say, of setting the standards every day in training, making sure that the manager's instructions get across. He's kind of the manager on the pitch, isn't he, Kieran Trippier? And it'd be a huge, huge loss. James says he's dropped form, but players are allowed to drop form. Sometimes it happens. You know, he's been there 2 years. This is the first sticky patch he's had. And the interesting thing for Newcastle at the moment, and we're going to come on and talk about other players as well, is that this is now the first testing time that this ownership has had, that this regime has had. Eddie Howe's done brilliantly since he's there, but suddenly there's certain questions being asked of him, of the team, of the ownership, because they can't delve into the transfer market like they want to. So something he's going to have to give, and whatever happens now, in 2024, it looks like Newcastle are going to have to sell someone, whether it be this window or the summer window. A big player is going to have to leave that football club that they don't want to leave.
Yeah,